This is Rick Malone for the San Francisco Symphony. Almost every civilization around the world has had an epic saga handed down over the centuries that helped explain how the world and that civilization came to be. In Finland, it's the Kalevala, a kind of crazy quilt of tales, songs, tableaus, and even spells that wasn't written down in any form until 1835. There's no main narrative, but there are several central characters, almost all of whom inspired music by Sibelius at some point. One of those characters is a man named Lemminkainen, whose epic descriptor is handsome man with far-roving mind. His character combines the cleverness and strength of Ulysses, the good looks and power over the dead of Osiris, the heroism of Siegfried, and the lack of morality of Don Juan. And his exploits took him from the frozen tundra to the underworld and back again. Sounds like the perfect subject for an opera. And it almost was. In the early 1890s, Finland was beginning to itch for independence from the Russian Empire, and artists like Sibelius were caught up in the movement, exploring their country's national artistic heritage in different ways, including the Kalevala. Sibelius took a story from the epic and turned it into his first major success, the cantata Kullervo, in 1892. As a follow-up, he'd planned to go back to the Kalevala for an opera, and he worked on it off and on for several years. But then he took a visit to Bayreuth and immersed himself in the world of Wagner. At first, he was enthralled, but eventually he soured on Wagner's music and his worldview and decided that opera was not where his future lay. Instead, Sibelius began studying Franz Liszt's symphonic poems, and he realized that not only was this kind of musical storytelling a better fit for him, but that he could repurpose some of the music from that unfinished opera. He went back to the Kalevala, and this time he chose 4 episodes focusing on the exploits of Lemminkainen, stringing them together in a work that turned out to be more than a suite, but not quite a symphony, and which helped him to discover his true voice as a composer for orchestra. Sibelius also found a new way to tell his musical stories. Rather than following a narrative progression the way Liszt or Richard Strauss did in their tone poems, Sibelius focused more on atmosphere, highlighting episodes in the story with snapshots rather than film clips. The 2 opening chords of the first of the 4 legends, Lemminkainen and the Maidens of the Island, are like portals thrown open, providing a glimpse of the mythic past. In this part of the story, Lemminkainen finds himself on an island populated by 1,000 brides and widows, and he spends a considerable amount of time enjoying their attentions, at least until the mysteriously absent men return. A theme of passionate longing alternates with dance music. highlighting the various pleasures that Lemminkainen enjoys with his beautiful hostesses. The dance music becomes wilder and wilder. And a big melody grows to a huge climax. As the men return and drive Lemminkainen off the island, much to the chagrin of the ladies he leaves behind. The second movement, The Swan of Tuonela, is the best known and one of the best known of all Sibelius's works. Tuonela is the land of the dead in Finnish mythology. It's surrounded by a black and turbulent river and guarded by a swan who floats serenely on the rapids, singing. Sibelius creates a remarkable sense of stasis here, sustaining a mood that is intensely evocative despite the limited palette of sounds that he uses. The tension seems to stretch almost into infinity. The image of the swan was important to Sibelius. He came back to it for the finale of his Fifth Symphony, and the Swan of Tuonela was one of the pieces played at his funeral. This sets the scene for Episode 3, Lemminkainen in Tuonela. Lemminkainen has gone to the underworld to shoot the swan as part of his quest, but instead he is killed by his own nemesis, a blind cowherd who dismembers the corpse and throws the pieces into the river. When Lemminkainen's mother hears about his fate, she goes to the underworld herself to recover his body, stitch it back together, and bring him back to life. That little four-note theme almost seems dropped in, but it will become more important later on. The swan makes a reappearance. And there is an ominous theme in the brass that returns several more times, each time more apocalyptically. The movement ends with an ambiguous coda with a wistful cello solo that once again recalls the swan. The final episode, Lemminkäinen's journey home, starts with a powerful repeated figure that sets up a relentless forward momentum. The bassoon brings back that four-note theme from the previous movement. And even though it isn't really a theme for Lemminkäinen himself, it grows into the primary subject of what is, essentially, a symphonic rondo finale. With a principal theme that returns like the chorus of a pop song. The energy and momentum build toward a galloping finale. That brings the work itself back home to the key of E flat, where it began. Sibelius and Mahler once had a conversation about the nature of the symphony. Mahler, in one of his most famous quotes, said that a symphony should encompass everything, like the world, while Sibelius admired the tight structure and profound logic that created an interconnection between all the motifs. Over the next 30 years and through 7 symphonies, Sibelius got closer and closer to this ideal. Eventually, he became known as one of the greatest symphonists of the 20th century. But the seeds were sown in the 1890s in the 4 legends from the Kalevala. This is Rick Malone for the San Francisco Symphony.